Well, hey there, friend, and welcome back for another episode of the Your.Hair.Mentor podcast, where I'm your host and your hair mentor, Crystal Green. And I invite you to come take a listen to the top leaders and thinkers and experts and innovators in the beauty industry as they share their stories of triumph and struggles and success in creating their businesses behind the chair. I hope you enjoy these episodes just as much as I did recording them. See you on the inside, friends.
Right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and just say thank you to Ashton for being here. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Ashton?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. And I feel like this is kind of a little treat for my listeners because I normally talk to beauty industry pros and I speak to hairstylists, but most hairstylists are really intrigued with things like personality tests and horoscopes and zodiac stuff and, like, dare I say, the woo stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so I know I'm fascinated with Enneagram stuff. And so you're here today as what is your Instagram handle?
Enneagram Ashton.
Enneagram Ashton. So Enneagram Ashton is here today to share with us Enneagrams. And then I kind of want to hear like your story and how you got to be where you are. So maybe can you give us like a quick intro of like where you're located and just like a little tidbit about you first?
Yeah. So my name is Ashton. I'm Enneagram Ashton on Instagram, and I am located in central Pennsylvania. I have two little kids. I have a 2.5-year-old girl and a 5-month-old baby, a husband, a rescue pup. And I have my bachelor's and master's degree in psychology. And that's how I first got started in the Enneagram because, learning about psychology for many years, you always hear about different personality tests. And it wasn't until I was in my master's program that I discovered the Enneagram and ultimately kind of changed my life because I'd always been into these tests, but I was like, something's missing. And when I learned about the Enneagram, which I'm sure I'll talk to you about today, it's more of a tool instead of a test where you can learn not just about yourself, but about others. And so from there, then I created my Instagram account and ended up becoming certified. And that's what led me to here today.
That's so cool. Yeah, I'd love to get into a little bit how the Enneagram can play into us as service providers and those that we serve, because I'm sure if there's some knowledge behind who you're serving and how you can serve them, it'll come a little easier.
Yeah, for sure. So, what's difficult about the Enneagram is that, what's difficult and what's amazing about the Enneagram is that it isn't about your behaviors, it's about your motivation. So, it's a personality typing system that separates people into 9 different types or 9 different ways of viewing the world. And so, there are stereotypical behaviors that are associated with each of the types, but it's about our motivations, our biggest fears, and our biggest desires that drive our behaviors. So, as service providers, when you're looking at people and looking at their behaviors, you might not be able to tell their Enneagram type because you're looking at behaviors instead of motivations. But what it can do is spark conversation where you can start to, say to them, have you heard of the Enneagram? Do you know your type? And then learn to, how can I change this behavior, this relationship based on knowing that knowledge about one another.
Right. I almost envision it as part of like an onboarding system for
Right.
stylists, to see new clients. Like we like to send out consultation forms and things
Mhm.
like that. And there might be just like a little addition they can send out that's like, and take this Enneagram test so we
Right.
can know each other even better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also a part-time professor, and that's kind of what I do with my students, right? Where I'm like, hey, I don't know if you've heard of the Enneagram before, but take this test, like look into these types and tell me what you think you are so that I know how to interact with you better. So similarly, I think it can be really impactful for the service providers as well.
Yeah, you know what I find so fascinating about, I don't know a ton about the Enneagram stuff. I want you to kind
Mhm.
of dig with us a little bit more into that. But from what I've learned, at first it just seemed like this kind of fringy, funny thing, right? Like, oh, sure, let me take this quiz and figure out what my Enneagram type is, just like you'd take on the back of a Cosmo magazine, right?
Right. Yeah.
But then I heard of people using it in like professional settings where, like individuals would have on their doors, their office doors, like what their Enneagram number is
Yeah.
as a way to
Yeah.
be like, hey, this is how I interact with the world. And so, like, if you step into my office, you know that you're dealing with an Enneagram 3.
Yeah, totally. And I love that because like I said, it can be super helpful to learning how to interact with other people. And sometimes I just wish that like we could go in the world with like name tags on our on ourselves, like, hi, I'm an Enneagram 2, or like, hi, I'm an Enneagram 4, so that we can learn how to interact with other people. And I think, in general, we tend to, as humans, we tend to like get stuck in the way that we do things. And the Enneagram kind of reminds us that there are other ways of thinking that are out there and other ways to do things based on our Enneagram type.
Hmm, that's cool. Do you know? I know you're not like the creator of the Enneagram,
Yeah.
but do you know like the history of it and like when it was established and how it was established?
So it is a very old system. It's so old that we can't exactly pinpoint the exact like year that it was created or established, because it's between 2 to 4,000 years old. Like it's very
What?
old. Mhm.
What? That's
Yeah.
crazy.
And so it wasn't really until it started in the Middle East, and then it kind of, teachers like took it to South America, and then teachers from North America who were down studying in South America like brought it back here to the United States, and to North America as a whole. And the first books like weren't really written in English until like the 1970s, 1980s. And so, it's very old, and it has like a very blurry history because of that. But it's increased in popularity recently because of the internet,
Mm-hmm.
social media. We have access to more, just information at our fingertips. Whereas, before it took longer, obviously, for things to spread from, one part of the world to the next. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of, it's start, but it's one of the oldest like typing systems that's out there. And it's based on like that symbol that you see when it comes to the Enneagram, where people, drew that symbol to represent the 9 different types and the 9 points of the circle.
Isn't that fascinating that that kind of illuminates how humans have not changed a whole lot in the last couple thousand years?
Right.
That something that's that old is still something that resonates with us so well in modern times.
Yes, that's like super fascinating to me that, so many things have changed. Think about, obviously, the way that we read and write and access information, but at the root of it, we all have these motivations that have existed for so many years.
Awesome. So, can you give us? I know that it's a lot to like break down the Enneagram system personally because I've like read in it, but for someone that has no clue what we're talking about, can
Yeah.
you give us kind of like a 40,000 foot view of like what the Enneagram types are and then like some key points for each of them?
Yeah. So, like I said, your Enneagram type is based on your motivation instead of behavior. And your motivations are made up of your biggest fears and your biggest desires. And so, there are 9 different types. And like I said, it's kind of like 9 ways of viewing the world, like 9 different lenses and life views. So, the one is the reformer. Their biggest desire is to be seen as a good person, to be moral, ethical, right, and to do the right thing. And then their biggest fear is then being seen as a bad person or being wrong or doing the wrong thing, things like that. The 2 is the helper. Their biggest desire is to be loved, wanted, appreciated, needed by the people around them. And then their biggest fear is being unloved, unwanted, not needed, not appreciated. The 3 is the achiever. So their biggest desire, they do want to, achieve success, but ultimately they want to be respected, valued, validated for the things that they're doing. And then their biggest fear is failure the most. They fear failure the most, but then they also fear being seen as like incompetent or incapable of doing something.
Mm.
The 4 is the individualist. So their biggest desire is to be seen as unique or different or special or to create significance in life. And then their biggest fear is being seen as like insignificant or kind of boring. They also fear that something is like inherently wrong with them or that they're like defective in some sort of way.
Okay.
The 5 is the investigator. Their biggest desire is to seek knowledge. So they want to be able to be knowledgeable and then to be competent and for people to know that they like know the things. And then their biggest fear is arrogance or ignorance. Sorry, they fear being seen as ignorant or just like not knowledgeable or not able to do something.
Mm.
The 6 is the loyalist. So their biggest desire is safety, security, seeking guidance from other people. And then their biggest fear is typically fear itself. So they fear fear, but then also being without that support, guidance, or security from other people.
Mm-hmm.
7s are the enthusiasts. They're the most outgoing on the Enneagram.
I'm like, that's me.
Their biggest desire is they do want to have fun, but ultimately they're like seeking contentment in whatever they're doing. So they're looking for that contentment piece. And then their biggest fear, they do have FOMO, but they also fear being trapped in like any sort of emotional pain or negativity. The 8 is the challenger. So their biggest desire is to protect themselves and other people. And then their biggest fear is being seen as weak, powerless, or controlled in some way. And then the 9 is the peacemaker. So their biggest desire is to maintain a peaceful environment for themselves, for the people around them. And then their biggest fear is conflict. So they fear conflict the most. It doesn't mean that other people don't fear conflict. It just makes up the biggest motivation for 9. So they fear conflict and also being separated from the people that they love.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I know that was a lot, but it's really fascinating to me because as you're going through each of these, obviously I said I identify as a 7 for sure.
Yeah.
But it's like as you're describing this, I can think of particular people in my life that I would describe as each of these numbers. Right.
Yeah.
Even though there's like little parts and pieces of each of the description that I could identify with also, right? Like we all probably have a little bit of each of those, but there's obviously like the ones that shine most brightly. So it's really fascinating. Now I've heard, I don't know anything about this part of it, but you can have like wings of certain things. And so tell me what that means.
Yeah, so the wings are the numbers on either side of your main type. So a common misconception is that it's just like your second highest score. And it could be if it's next to your type, like it has to be next to your type. Some people will say like, I'm a 7 wing 3. And I'm like, that's not possible,
Okay.
So my thoughts on tests in general, tests are a really great place to start because they can give us a lot of valuable information. But the reality is that we're human and sometimes we'll answer tests in ways we want other people to perceive us instead of like who we actually are. Or we'll answer tests based on our behaviors instead of our motivations. And so, like I said before, you might, have shared motivations with other Enneagram types, but what makes up your type is your motivation. So, for example, conflict. I'm assuming that as a 7, you don't like love conflict.
Nope.
Yeah. So, and same with me as a 2. I'm a 2. So I also don't love conflict, but remember we said that for the 9, it makes up their biggest motivation, right? So 7s, 9s, 2s, all dislike conflict, which is a behavior.
Mm-hmm.
For nines, they dislike conflict because it like messes with their peace. It like disturbs their peace. For twos, they dislike conflict because of the relationship piece. So they feel like they're going to be unloved or unwanted, or it's going to harm their relationships. For sevens, they associate conflict with like negativity, remember? So they avoid negativity or emotional pain. And so that's why they dislike conflict. So again, a similar behavior, but different motivations dependent on your type. But anyways, back to wings. um, so that's my thoughts on tests in general, is sometimes we answer tests because of behaviors, but it really is about those motivations.
Right.
So for wings, it's the same, where you can take a test, but really you just have to look at the types on either side of your main type and see what resonates with you. So like as a 7, your wings could either be a 6 or an 8. And so you would just look at the 6 and the 8 and see what resonates with you the most.
Mm-hmm.
Another common misconception is that you only have one wing, when in reality you can access both of them. So most people do have a wing that they feel like is stronger than the other one. So I'm a 2 with a very strong 3 wing, but that doesn't mean that my one wing doesn't exist. It's just not as strong or as developed as my 3 wing.
Gotcha. And then I've heard that there's, times of our lives, or like, what would you call it? Stages of our lives when maybe we are like living our best life or not living our best life. And then there's characteristics associated with each of the Enneagram numbers that are going to like show more in that time. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah. So because the Enneagram is a symbol with lines that connect to other types, like those lines do mean something. So we all have a number that we go to when we're stressed, and we all have a number that we go to when we're in growth or when we're healthiest. And so, for example, using the 7, when they're stressed, will go to the unhealthy qualities of the 1. And that can look like being like highly critical of themselves and other people, maybe perfectionistic tendencies, a little bit of judgment, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And then, so then when you're in your like best state, or like a growth state, is that like when it's your number, your Enneagram number then?
When you're in your best spot, you're going to your growth line. So for 7s, that goes to the 5, and you take on the healthy qualities of your growth number. So for 7s, this looks like, kind of, for lack of better words, like chilling out. Like you're able to kind of pause, think things through, rely more on like research, or spend more time, just like thinking things through in general, instead of being impulsive. And like able to just like be by yourself and sit alone and things like that.
Really interesting. Okay, so you don't believe in, or you don't suggest the quiz being like maybe the best way to figure out your best fit of an Enneagram number. Take me on a journey. Like if I were to come to you and I had no idea what the Enneagram system is, and I was like, who are you? Enneagram what? Like where?
Yeah.
Plug me into your journey and tell me what that would look like to discover my Enneagram number.
Yeah. So, like I said, tests are a great place to start, because especially, some of the tests will give you results in the form of like a pie chart, or they'll rank your types. And those are like the tests that are okay. The tests that I'm talking about are the ones that say like, you are a 7 or you are a 3, because people will trust those responses and just like go on with their life. And then I end up seeing so many people who like test as a specific type, and then that might actually be who they are when they're stressed, right? For example, I know somebody recently that I was working with who thought she was a 1 for so long, and then realized she was a 7, and she just was that stressed out that she looked like a 1. So then she was answering the test with, behaviors that look like a 1, but the reason was because she was a stressed out 7. So take the test, and then, have those top 3 results, and then do your own research or hire somebody to help you figure out, okay, from those top 3 results, say I score high for a 7, a 1, and a 6, which one am I actually, and which one do I look like,
Yeah. And then, so like for you, do you offer like coaching sessions with people for that then? So if someone's like, hey, I need help kind of figuring out a little bit more what I've got going on, you work with
Yeah.
them one-on-one to try to figure stuff out on their own.
Yeah. So I help people figure out their type,
Mm-hmm.
where I will like have people send, or I will send people a test. They'll send me like their top 3 scores. And then I create like, it's almost like an interview, like interview questions where I'm asking them specific questions to try to get to the motivation of why people are doing things. Because again, when you're taking tests, they might ask you a question like, do you feel like you are more prone to like go out and explore or stay in on the couch? And when you're taking those tests, you have to pick one or the other,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that like there are probably sometimes you like to explore and sometimes you like to stay in on the couch. So you have to pick one, but then you're not able to explain, well, this is why I like to go out and explore. And so that's what I help people do, is to really think through, why do I do these things? And that's what makes up your Enneagram type.
Fascinating. Huh. Do you find that certain Enneagram types are attracted to certain kind of jobs and careers and industries, or is it that we're just all jumbled together?
So there are always going to be, some things that make sense or like you can explain in that sort of way. For service providers, it's technically people who are like able to be around people, right? So like you have to be okay with being around people. For sevens, for example, they love people, twos love people, sixes, nines, things like that. What I always say is like anybody can do anything. It's just utilizing those like natural strengths that you might have based on your type and knowing the things that might not come as naturally to you and like growing in those areas. So I always use this with like leadership. Like there are types who might be more like natural leaders, and it's not saying that other types can't be leaders. It's just, how do we get you to do that? So similarly with service providers, it's not saying like, oh, if you're a 5 and you're more introverted, that you wouldn't be able to do that. It's just, let's be aware of those qualities and learn how to nurture them in order to be the best version of yourself.
Right. And then I have to imagine that if you play on your specific strengths, like let's say you're in a career, like I'm a 7, in a career of service providing,
Mm-hmm.
that really lights me up and makes me feel inspired. I would guess that there's like a bit more fulfillment in that
Yeah.
regard if you're like leaning into something that really serves you, that like,
Mm-hmm.
plays on your what were you saying, not your strengths but your motivation behind
Yeah.
things. And so that's why I was wondering if you'd see that in different careers, and
Mm-hmm.
then like where you would see like the service providers, the people pleasers, the people lovers, but then the other ones that might be like, no, I don't want to talk to people, I just want
Right.
to do this thing that makes me feel valued in other ways, if that's more common.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay, so I'd like to try to tie this to my audience with, hairstylists and serving their people. So let's play like a little scenario here,
Yeah.
okay? So you said you're a 2 or you're a 3?
I'm a 2.
You're a 2. Okay, so we'll just use me and you for an example here because I know I'm a 7 and you're a 2. Okay, so you're a 2 and you're gonna come get your hair done by me, who's a
Mm-hmm.
7. As a 7, I tend to be a little more outgoing and like talkative, and like I like feeding on people's energies, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can I best serve you as a 2 in my chair?
Yeah, so twos can be similar to sevens in this way, where like they can be talkative and energetic and things like that as well. What twos might struggle with, I think about this, is like if they don't like something, they might have a hard time like speaking up about it.
Mm,
So, those are the characteristics I can think about like specifically when it comes to like having a service be provided for it too.
mm-hmm.
But as far as like the conversation in the chair, like they're going to be here for the conversations. Like they love not just like hearing like the conversation between the two of you, but if there are like other people in the room, like they really want to be like in tune with everybody. And so twos, are very in tune with like other people's emotions and feelings and needs. And so they might also inquire to you about like your life, like I want to like dig deep into like what you're going through or your experiences. And for sevens specifically, they don't like negativity. So some of those like harder feelings or emotions might be difficult for like a seven to share. But twos want to make sure like the conversation is not just on them.
Right, right. And that it feels more like authentic kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's
Yeah.
interesting because I
Not just
have
like what's the weather or like what'd
totally.
you do this weekend? Like I want to go deep and talk about your life story.
Yeah, I can like immediately think of conversations I've had with clients of mine that I know would probably identify as like a seven. And like
Yeah.
we're just ping-ponging talking about like nonsense basically the whole time. And
Yeah.
it's just like it's basically just entertaining. We're like laughing, not talking
Yeah.
about anything serious or like
Mhm.
deep or real. And it's a great time. And then I've had other times where I've had clients in my chair that, yeah, they like to get a little deeper. And it's kind of like, oh, okay. Like for
Yeah.
me, I
Like
have
a
to be like,
therapy
okay,
session. Yeah.
yeah, I'm like, okay, we're doing this, you know? Okay, that's fascinating.
And then you probably have people who like don't want to talk at all, you
Totally.
know? And those are going to be specific types as well.
Right, but I've had to like kind of fumble around to figure that out. Like I kind of
Right.
go into my like usual spiel when I'm getting to know someone and then I kind of start to realize like, oh, there's not a lot of feedback coming back or like,
Mhm.
this person's being a little more quiet. And so now in my career, I'm to the point where I can be like, "Hey, would you appreciate just not talking?" Like I'll just like say it, but it's taken me a long time to get comfortable
Yeah.
to doing that.
Mhm.
I used to just kind of be like, "Oh, okay, I guess they don't want to talk to me.
Yeah.
I'll just do my thing." And so I think it'd be really helpful to know ahead of time. But then that thing that you said about a two not being comfortable to say when they don't like something, I'm like, oh my God, girl, that would be so good to know going into
Yeah.
an appointment at the end to be like, hey, like, do you like this? I want to make sure that you actually like it. And like, it's okay if you don't, you can tell me because you can kind of play into those pieces of them that they're not going to offer up
Right.
as easily.
Yeah, totally.
That is so fascinating. I almost want to make like a Enneagram cheat sheet with you or
Right.
something. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? To where you can be like, "Hey, hairstylist," or like, I just think hairstylist because that's who I am. But like, if you're talking to this person, this is the dynamic you should watch out for or lean into or whatever.
Right. And just
Okay,
like service provider, like if you're
yeah.
providing a service and like somebody's not happy with that service, like these are the types that are going to have a hard time saying something. Whereas like eights and ones, like they'll be pretty direct with you, you
Oh
know?
my God, my husband is an eight through and through. It's hilarious. He thought the whole Enneagram thing was kind of like eye rolly a couple
Right.
years ago when I first found it. He's like, come on, these things are made so that anyone can find anything to attach to, to identify as a number. And I was like, okay, let's do yours then. And so I did this like
Yeah.
lengthy quiz with him. We get to the end and I'm describing an eight to him. And he's like, oh,
Yeah.
holy cow,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's like the opposite of me. He'll just like say it like it is, has no problem. He's very confident in his feelings
Yeah.
and kind of like doesn't care what other people think about him.
Right. Yep. That's pretty
So
much an
funny.
eight.
Yeah. Do you help a lot of people with like personal relationships with their enneagrams too? Like I would imagine this would come into play with like marriages
Oh
and that
yeah.
kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, totally. That's probably where I've seen like the most impact with, well, not just in other people's like workplaces, but in, romantic relationships, friendships, uh, family relationships, just being able to like understand, like kind of what you were saying about your husband, like understand those things on a deeper level.
Mhm. Do you know at what age you can kind of start to understand someone's Enneagram number? Because, like, you have young kids, and so do I. So I'm like curious about this part.
Yeah, so you can't tell people's Enneagram types until like they have the ability to communicate why they're doing something. And that's because, like, let's say, for example, I always use my nephew as an example. Let's say I'm looking at my nephew who is 6 and is very concerned about like order and putting things away and things being in a specific straight line and coloring in the lines, things like that. I could look at that and be like, oh, wow, like he's pretty into like perfection. He might be a 1, but I don't know why he's doing
Mm.
those things. And obviously at 6, like he also doesn't know why he's doing those things. And so I always say, like, unfortunately, when they're a teenager is really when you can start to like have those conversations and to figure out their type. But you can figure out how to parent effectively based on your type.
Darn it. I,
I
I was like,
know. Sorry.
I'd love to be able to figure out my 8-year-old right now. She is a pickle for me.
Mhm. I know everybody wants to do that, and it would be so amazing if we could, you know.
Right, right. I've kind of dove into the love languages thing as
Mhm.
well, which I think are kind of fun to learn about. And I've thought often, like, what are my kids' love languages? But I think it changes like weekly for them.
Right.
Just when
Yeah.
I think I've got them dialed in, I'm like, oh, wait, they're still kind of growing and changing. So you can't
Yeah.
really figure that out,
Right. Yeah.
unfortunately. But I like the aspect of like knowing yours from a parenting perspective, because
Mhm.
then you can kind of understand why maybe you're reacting the way you
Yeah.
are, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so
And
cool.
you and your husband and how you kind of like parent together, things like that.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious, so you said you got into Enneagrams early in your career in psychology, right?
Mhm.
At what point were you like, this is going to be okay? Well, let me backtrack. Quick question. Uh, Online social media stuff, do you bring in clients from there? Because you've got like a pretty decent
Oh, yeah.
following on there. Okay. So is
Yes.
that where you
Mhm.
meet most people? Okay.
Yeah.
So at what point were you like, this is going to be something that's going to be like a moneymaker on the side
Yeah.
for me, right? Because you said
Yeah.
you're teaching as
Yeah.
well. So just like tell me about that dynamic and like how that developed for you.
Yeah, so I was working in the helping field. I have always worked, well, I say this, but now it's been several years, but I had always worked in like the domestic violence, sexual assault prevention field. And so I was doing that when I created my account. And I came home one day and said, like, "Oh, I think that I have to like start to get trained in this because so many people were asking me for help in figuring out their types." That was really, what kind of started it. Is like, I need help figuring out my type. And I would help people naturally because I'm a 2. And then I'd be like, why am I doing this? Like, I could be making money from helping people do this. So I went and got certified. And at that point, my account just kept growing and growing and growing to the point where I was serving people and helping people figure out their type and doing some coaching. And then I ended up quitting my job in January of 2020, which was a crazy time.
Oh, convenient timing.
Yes, yes. So obviously panic
Yeah.
ensued because I was like, oh no, we're stuck at home. But what people learned in that time was to do things virtually. And so that's kind of where like my virtual business took off, and being able to work with companies and organizations as well as still individuals to help them kind of strengthen their relationship with self and others.
Mm-hmm. I didn't even know prior to speaking to you today that there was like a certified Enneagram program
Yeah,
that you can do.
multiple. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So it must be a growing field then, I would imagine.
It is, and a lot of like therapists are starting to utilize the Enneagram in their practice as well. So then they're becoming like certified to be able to use that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's most fascinating about it too, is that it's picked up by professionals. It makes
Yeah.
it seem more legitimate and not just like this book of love languages that somebody
Yeah.
wrote. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's kind of like la
Yeah.
la. Like
Well,
no, this
that's
is
what some
actually cool.
people like don't even realize that it's as old as it is, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, it's just this new concept that was created." And in reality, like it's been around for several years. It's just now gaining popularity.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you still teach now, you said, right?
Yeah. So I teach part-time really just because I love it.
Uh-huh. Like in a college setting? Is that what
Yeah.
you're
Mhm.
okay, yeah.
Yep.
At what point, like if you were to make enough or do enough with the Enneagram coaching, would you walk away from teaching?
So I was supposed to walk away, but
Oh, girl, me too.
I keep getting pulled back in. But I do, and it's part of me being a 2, I think, is like I love, and I've been doing it for so many years now that like I've been with students since they were freshmen. Then like a bunch of them just graduated last year. And so it's, it's like the relationship thing for me as a 2, where I'm like, I want to see these relationships through. But now my husband works with me. And so it's kind of, teaching is just like another thing kind of that I do, so there's just a lot going on that I never, 5 years ago would have thought that like we would be here doing
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Well, good for you. I love asking that question to my fellow hairstylists that I interview.
Yeah.
Because it's like a passion project for us doing
Mhm.
hair. And then, I see this kind of tipping point that we get to as digital entrepreneurs, right? And then we're still
Yeah.
doing the thing that we love where we're like serving people in
Yes.
person. And like, at what point do we kind of like let one go and then take on the other all the way?
Yeah. I know. And for me as a 2, it's like, oh, if you continue to tell me that I'm doing a great job and that you want me to be there, like, oh, I'll keep showing up and being there.
That's so funny. I feel that
Yeah.
way too, even. I'm like,
Yeah.
maybe I should take the Enneagram test again. Like what headspace was I in when I took it? I
So
don't know.
but for 7s, and what you're talking about is probably like all of the experiences that you get to have,
Yes.
whereas like for 2s, it's mostly like the relationships and the connections and like feeling validated by those.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Mhm.
That's so cool. Okay, Ashton, will you tell me for my listeners if they want to soak up more from you, what do you have to offer and where can they find you?
Yeah, so I do, like I said, that one-on-one coaching where I help you figure out your type, or if you want to go deeper, you can do that as well. I also have courses and workshops and digital products, like literally anything that you could want to learn about the Enneagram. And you can find that at enneagramashton.com or follow me on Instagram at enneagramashton. And I would love to connect.
Would you recommend people maybe like reaching out to you and asking, is it like an individual basis of like where you would plug someone in along your customer journey? Or is there just kind of like the world is your oyster, pick as you choose?
So it depends. If people don't know their type and really want to start, from scratch, like that would be where I would start with the Discover Your Enneagram type session.
Okay.
If people are like, oh, I'm kind of familiar with this topic and I want to learn more, then like courses might be, the
Mm-hmm.
best point of action. But it really does depend on like the customer and what they want to learn.
Right. And then I love the posts that you do where you're like, an Enneagram 7 would do this in this
Mhm.
situation, or an Enneagram 9 would do this. Do you do a newsletter with something like that that you send out or anything like that?
So yeah, so you can also find that on my website where you can get a free guide on all 9 types and then be plugged into my email list as well.
Perfect. I think I'm going to go sign up for that
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this with us. I feel like any way that I can try to impact my industry for the better, I think is why I'm here. And I think there is a place for something like this as a service provider dealing with real humans,
Yeah.
And so I think this is just really going to add a lot of value to my listeners' lives. So thank you for being here and sharing with
Yeah,
me
thanks
today.
for having me. I'm
Yeah.
excited to see what people think and how they utilize it and all
Yeah.
of the things that they're doing.
Oh, I know they're gonna like it. I can already tell
Yeah.
you that. Yes, exactly. Okay, well, I'll let you get on to your family and your busy life here. And again, thanks for being here, and we'll just be in touch.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
All right, friend. Well, that's a wrap for this episode of the Your Hair Mentor podcast. It has been my pleasure to be here as your host. Again, my name is Crystal Green. And until next time, my friend, as I always love to say, have a wonderful hair day, and I'll see you then. Okay, bye.